Welcome to Decoding the Shopper, a World Panel by Numerator podcast. Most data within this podcast is provided by World Panel UK and Ireland, with some additional sources for a wider perspective. This is the final episode in a three-part series around the importance in innovation and new product development. This episode focuses on how advantage is protected.
Visibility actually is one of the differentiators between those products that have kind of beaten their penetration expectations and those that have not. So being seen is really key. Extending your competitive set in some form is a great way to grow. But also with that functionality, for example, in drinks, you also get a price premium. So it's another idea of, there are added benefits here. You're going to have to pay a little bit more compared to a standard drink.
There is no link between scale and incrementality. There is a link with promotions, and just saying these rules in a way that we can say is actually consistent across all launches.
Hello, welcome to our podcast. My name's Paul Fraser. I've got the privilege of being in charge, nominally, I think, of the analytics team here at World Panel. And we're here today to talk to you about innovation. And before joining World Panel, I spent most of my career on the client side in marketing, launching lots of innovation and managing brands. And I can think of few things that cause me more stress than an imminent launch and monitoring a launch to see if it was successful. And I know for a fact that those clients of you out there have a big target on your back when it comes to innovation. And there's a lot of resource, time, stress, and worry that goes into launch and post-launch. So here today, we're going to try and unpack that a little bit and give you the opportunity to learn what might make that a little bit less stressful and hopefully a lot more successful than you already are. And I'm joined in that regard by two of our brilliant researchers, Mark Smithson and Jackson Woods. Mark, welcome.
Hi, Paul. I'm Mark Smithson. So I've spent most of my career actually trying to get under the skin of shopper behavior, really trying to look at the patterns, using lots of interesting analytics to try to really explain and see what's going on in lots of different contexts.
I'm Jackson, and I've spent close to a decade now doing the roughly the same thing. And I suppose the difference is I'm a little bit more specifically pointed towards innovation. So most of the questions our clients ask come across my desk at some point or other.
And you talk about sustainability, and the report talks about protecting advantage as well as being, the kind of final piece in the jigsaw. What is it that specifically brands need to do to protect that advantage? What's in that playbook that says, you need to be looking out for this when you're launching products, so that you make sure that you're protecting your advantage and those sales stay with you and grow over time?
Well, I guess beyond some of the points we've been talking about, which relate to this idea of the premium. So, trying to protect your value in the way that you are launching, which is, easing off and resisting too deep a discount on your promotions, for example. That will help protect your kind of advantage and protect your value. The other thing beyond that we've seen interestingly is, is around this idea of actually, the product experience. So we've actually, as part of this piece of work, conducted some research where we've actually been talking and interviewing shoppers through survey that have visited the category at the time that products had launched. And we've been looking at some of the aspects behind their kind of reflections and observations in the category at that time. And what we've seen there is actually experience does come into this. So product experiences plays a role here. What's interesting, it's not quite as strong as visibility. So visibility is a really, really key thing to get right. But we've seen that you cannot generate lots of detractors to your product. There is a risk there. So you've got to be good. You don't have to be amazing, but you definitely don't want to really disappoint people. That's another problem that you can create. So expectation setting and expectation management, be good enough as a product so you don't really disappoint people, is also a very key thing.
Sorry, Jason, go on.
Expectations is a really common theme that we see throughout. If you say to Tesco or whoever else, we're going to sell this many units, and you don't, then you've set false expectations.
Yeah.
So it's a case of being realistic.
Yeah. It's expectations for the retailer and the consumer.
Yeah. Is our
Yeah.
Is our rate of sale really going to meet those thresholds, or do we need to promote too heavily to do that? If so, should have killed it a longer time ago.
And I've got the voices of all the old agencies, creative agencies, in my head when screaming at me to ask you about this visibility point, because I think they'd all be saying, we told you so. It's really, really important. So I think what I'm hearing is, yes, promotions matter in store. Yes, they're important. Make sure you balance them. But there's more to it than that, that product parity's a minimum, but actually visibility in the sense of the communication, the design, etc., is really paramount. If you don't get seen, you don't get bought.
Absolutely. And you've got really two jobs to do. One, you want to create an environment where the new launch is actually generating this category incrementality, which is great. We talked about some of the premium and the positioning, and there's other techniques as well. But the second thing you've got to then try and do is obviously scale up. You have to be big as well as incremental. So the scaling up requires primarily you attracting more shoppers. Penetration is clearly the measure that we see in our data that's linked to scale of new launches. Much, much stronger predictor than, say, repeat rate, which has got a very weak relationship with scale. And to get that penetration, you have to be seen. And again, we've seen that coming through in the survey-based elements of the study, which is visibility actually is one of the differentiators between those products that have kind of beaten their penetration expectations and those that have not. So being seen is really key. And I guess that relates to all kinds of metrics. We talked about the role of promotion already and how important that is, but also secondly, there's going to be lots you can do around your pack and your imagery and the kind of the noise that you can make in store.
And clearly a lot of these products we're looking at here, self-evidently, have done a good job of that. What struck you about some of these products? What stood out for you, Jackson, when you were when the data started to show these products and you start to look at them and think, yeah, I can see that. What was it that struck you?
I don't think there's any one connecting thread that connects all of these products. There's a few different ways they've positioned themselves as additive to category value. One is a simple price premium. They're charging more than the rest of the competitive set are, but they're positioning that as a saving to something else. So the classic is the save the soak. You might need to buy that product, but you're saving a lot of time because you don't have to wait for your dishes to soak. With the cat food, your cat will eat it straight away, and you've not wasted some cheaper food or something like that. Or indeed the bagels, for example, that could well be stealing from other bread, something like that. But then you've got some more kind of normal things, new flavors of different types of soft drinks, different types of crisps, which are just providing something new and interesting.
Yeah.
But ultimately, they're still all driving a premium within that category.
So you're battling to keep and expand occasionality with the consumer effectively. You're trying to get them to buy into the idea of using these and therefore expand the occasionality of your sector or category. And you talk about drinks, I think, quite a lot in the report that's coming out. What was it that struck you about the drinks category that echoed a lot of this stuff?
Well, I think again on that, it's one of those areas that's seeing a lot of change at the moment. Huge amount of disruption in the world of drinks. And I think, things like, I think in the report we called out this idea of functional drinks. It's almost saying a different need, a different kind of motivation to buy, slightly extending the need state, maybe extending the kind of the occasions and the motivations and types of shopper that would buy into this. So this idea of extending your competitive set in some form is a great way to grow. But also with that functionality, for example, in drinks, you also get a price premium. So it's another idea of, there are added benefits here. You're going to have to pay a little bit more compared to a standard drink. But you've got a wonderful blend of both those things going on. And I think actually with these products, lots of those are exhibiting that. You've got you've got some kind of price premium in the proposition, but you've also got something that is being offered that's a little bit outside the norms of the competitive set or category. That's trying to stretch that occasion. So it's another key thing that we've seen in the study in how you build advantage and how you kind of again, in coming back to the playbook that we've written, that actually if you can stretch your product into something new, that actually helps you. And mechanically, that sort of helps you beat this cannibalization and trade down problem. It's kind of creating something that's incremental.
So a unique occasion or something that, to your point, Jackson, earlier, that creates a differentiation versus what you were already doing, and the consumer's happy to change that habit or modify that habit.
I think the interesting thing for me about drinks is water is always an option, right? So anytime you buy a drink, you're trading it from something you could have done basically for free, which is unlike food, for example, where there's always going to be some kind of cost. You can go cheap, you can go fancy, but there's always the option not to spend anything at all.
Don't eat too soon. I think all our water bills are going to go out soon, but you're definitely right in that respect. What you've done loads of projects across the years in innovation, Jackson. Was there something that surprised you in this study that you think maybe clients have been missing before, or that reinforce the things that maybe we've been intuitively saying before?
For me, it's having all the evidence in one place, because as you say, I've looked at many projects and I've connected the dots over the years, but we've never had this kind of holistic view of all the launches in grocery. So we can actually say things like, there is no link between scale and incrementality. There is a link with promotions, and just saying these rules in a way that we can say is actually consistent across all launches, rather than consistent for whichever individual client problem we were tackling at that point in time.
Yeah, it's why I love data analytics, because you can always find an example that proves your point in some form. But when you look at all the examples at scale, that's when the true patterns really start to reveal themselves. And I think that's what we've tried to do with this piece of work, is let's look at hundreds of launches across lots of categories and understand what do we keep seeing coming up time and time again, that starts to give you a really great sense of what works and what doesn't work.
I've certainly seen many slides that connect brand growth to innovation. And a lot of the time you're just looking very specifically at a very specific situation. This is a holistic look at things. Is it really true or not? And it turns out not.
What really struck me, which resonated from my old world and to the new, is that the report didn't just focus on straight metrics. What it illuminated was how you manage the levers in marketing to try and maximize your chances. There'll always be a chance innovation fails, but that's almost been trotted out as a trope, an excuse for why it should fail. And I think what this does is say, actually, there's a whole series of factors that you could take account of and face into in your funnel, in your stage gate earlier on, to give you a much better chance of success. And they're difficult because sometimes they come with difficult trade-offs inside clients. I know that for a fact. Thinking about the price premium that would make me nervous in an environment where people are constrained and not wanting to spend too much. But this demonstrates that people will trade up when times are tough, when times are good. It doesn't matter because the value is there. Yeah. What, for each one of you, what would be your kind of one thing you would say, if there's one thing from all this that you would say, take away and say to a client, remember this one thing, what would it be? I'm trying not to look at any of you in particular, but
is it too cryptic to say, think about what success actually means?
Yeah.
Because I get that question in isolation all the time. Like, how do I make my innovation successful? And my answer is always, how exactly are you defining success? Do you mean big year one spend? Do you mean length in market?
Yeah.
Do you mean incrementality? Or some kind of combination of the three?
I think that's a great point, because if I remember back, success was you got it to market, you got decent distribution, and your sales were at or ahead of the budget or the retailer expectations. After that, you kind of went, job done.
Yeah.
And a year later, if it was failing, it was like, oh, all hands to the pump, what do we do? So I think that's a really important point, is that maybe those of us who are launching innovation or are launching innovation now are looking at the wrong measure.
Yeah.
Or it could be failing and you wouldn't even know.
Yeah.
Because you won't be able to see in day-to-day sales trends whether you're truly cannibalizing from the rest of your portfolio.
Yeah.
But if you're doing that and trading down all of those, then all you've done with all that effort and activity is diluted your margins.
Yeah. I would really echo that too, Jackson. And I think it's really that value of actually being able to, you use a data set like a panel that can actually show you, shoppers and how they move and change their behavior throughout the journey of that innovation. I think that's been probably the greatest revelation is this idea you've got to think broader about the portfolio and the category, and not just think about the success and the rate of sale and the volume of sales on the one particular SKU or small collection of SKUs that form the innovation itself. There's a bigger game going on. So that again is, I think it's a similar answer for me, Paul. It's you've got to really think about that. But also I think there's some genuine surprises in the work we've done as well. So I've really enjoyed finding that that short-term link between how much you innovate and how you grow. I was perhaps not expecting to find no correlation. That's really interesting. And maybe another thing that's come out from the research is this idea of, actually you don't really see a super strong linkage between people's rating of the product experience and how successful it's been in terms of generating lots of penetration or some other success metrics. There is a relationship there, but it's not incredibly strong. It tends to revolve around this idea of don't really disappoint people and don't really annoy them and cause a dreadful experience. But beyond that, you can be okay, and you can still do really well if you've got the other fundamental components in place around the premium and the visibility and some of the things we've talked about.
Yeah, I don't think that will surprise too many people in the marketing world who understand that kind of your product is the sort of table stakes. It needs to be parity, but it does. Yeah, you don't need it doesn't mean you don't want, but you don't need to have a massive product or taste advantage. But if you put it out in dull packaging and don't give it any visibility, and you get pricing too low or too high, then it doesn't matter how good your taste is, you'll never sell anything.
Exactly. Be good enough and be very visible, and you can win that way.
In some ways, if you need a rave review from your friends and family to pick up and try a new grocery product, these things are all less than £5, so very much in the impulse territory. You've already lost in a way.
Yeah.
Like the key for making a proposition work in the first place is being able to articulate why somebody should buy you in the 10th of a second it takes to make that decision.
Yeah. Everything invariably in this world comes back to get more penetration, get more buyers, get visible. So
there was. It often is the case that actually, if you go back in the annals, there's somewhere that the answer was always there. You just it just takes somebody like you guys to go back and do the work to find out that actually a lot of that stuff was true all along. Although to your point, Mark, actually it surprised me that having been somebody who put in metrics around how much innovation we had to do and things like that, I was a bit shocked when it said, actually, it's not about how much innovation you do, it's about how successful that innovation is in driving consumer behavior change.
Absolutely. And I suppose the caveat on that is that it's a short-term measure. So we're not seeing that over the short-term year or two kind of time frame. But obviously, long-term, innovation is incredibly important. And you have to do it because you have to keep refreshing your packaging.
Well, every brand here started as a piece of innovation.
Exactly.
Every brand on the shelf started as a piece of innovation.
And they're not in their 1920s, 30s or 1950s incarnation still. They have evolved and moved. So that's really important.
Lindor are the classic case study for that. I think over the course of a decade, 15 years, they quadrupled their market share just with the truffles, single pack size. And all they did, every single year they launched a new flavour. Second year, that flavour went national, Tesco exclusive in the first. The third year, they had enough data to work out what the role of that flavour should be. Is it a Mother's Day thing? Is it a Father's Day thing? What event should we link to? And it was just that over and over again. Each individual launch is what it was, but when you stand back and look at how much they've grown over time just through innovation, that's the archetype, I suppose.
Yeah, I think, success has many fathers, doesn't it? But I think it's interesting that I think what you've uncovered is some of the levers or the graphic equalizer of innovation and the settings you need to put it on in order to give yourself the best chance of it coming out with the right kind of sound for the consumer. So I read it with my old hat on, and as I genuinely thought, gosh, I wish I'd had this a few years ago, and thought back to some of the launches that went well and some that didn't go quite so well, which there were a few. So congratulations. I thought it was a great piece of work, and thanks for spending a bit of time with me today to talk about it. Cheers, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
This was the last episode in a 3-part series around the importance in innovation and new product development. Our previous episodes looked at how Advantage is built, but also how Advantage can drift. Thank you for listening to Decoding the Shopper, a World Panel by Numerator podcast.